Welcome back to another episode of Toxic Love. As always, I am your host, Derek Capmore. And in today's video, folks, I wanted to go over the Alex Murdaugh tragedy. Alex Murdaugh, a.k.a. Alexander Murdaugh, happened to be a very successful and prominent attorney who's now doing life in prison. Not only that, but he happens to come from a pretty long lineage of attorneys in his family. Anyways, the state of South Carolina Richard Alexander Murdaugh was the trial of American former lawyer Alex Murdaugh, a.k.a. Alexander Murdaugh, for the murder of his wife Maggie and their 22-year-old son Paul on June 7, 2021. The trial in the 14th Circuit of the South Carolina Circuit Court began on January 25, 2023 and ended on March 2nd with a guilty verdict on all 4 counts. Murdaugh, who had pleaded not guilty, was sentenced to 2 life sentences to run consecutively without the possibility of parole. He soon filed a motion for new trial, alleging that the court clerk tampered with the jury. A new trial court judge denied the motion in January 2024. Local media called the trial South Carolina's quote-unquote trial of the century and quote-unquote arguably one of the most high-profile and sensational cases in South Carolina legal history. Now, Alexander Murdaugh is a member of the Murdaugh family, a family of attorneys prominent in a low country region of South Carolina. At the time of his death, Alex's young son Paul had been under indictment in the death of Mallory Beach, a passenger on a power boat Paul had allegedly driven into a bridge while drunk. Alex called his wife Maggie, 52 years old, on June 7, 2021 and asked her to meet with him at the Murdaugh family hunting lodge in Islington, purportedly, and excuse me once again, folks, so that the two of them could travel together to see Alex's father, Randolph Murdaugh III, who was terminally ill. Maggie texted her friend saying her husband sounded quote-unquote fishy and was up to something. After parking her car at the house, Maggie walked to the dog kennels, where she found her son Paul. Alex called police from his cell phone at 10:06 p.m. saying he had discovered the bodies of Maggie and Paul near the dog kennels. Each had been shot multiple times in the head, wrists, and chest with different guns. Murdaugh claimed that it was at the time of the killings he had been with his mother, who has dementia. However, cell phone data, including video containing Alex's voice, placed him at the scene before the murders. In October 2021, it was revealed that South Carolina Law Enforcement Division had regarded Alex as a person of interest in the homicide since the start of the investigation. The investigation was heavily criticized by Murdaugh's defense attorney, Dick Harpootlian, during trial. The crime scene was spoiled by rain. Police reportedly failed to collect various evidence, and family members and friends were allowed to walk through the scene. Now, Murdaugh was arrested in June 2022 after a Colleton County grand jury issued an indictment charging him with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime and the deaths of Maggie and Paul. The indictment stated that Alex shot his wife with a rifle and his son with a shotgun. Murdaugh pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors said they would seek life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, not the death penalty. Murdaugh's trial began January 25th, 2023 at the Colleton County Courthouse in Walterboro, with instructions from the judge and opening statements from the prosecution and defense. Creighton Waters, chief prosecutor for the grand jury, led the prosecuting team against Murdaugh. John Meadows, a California attorney with extensive experience in murder trial, was hired by the Attorney General of South Carolina as part of the prosecuting team. Murdaugh was represented by Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin. The cases were overseen by Judge Clifton Newman. Defense counsel argued that the prosecution should be prohibited from asking questions related to Murdaugh's financial crimes, but the judge overruled the objections and announced he would make a formal ruling on the matter on Thursday, February 2nd, 2023. The judge dismissed the jury early on Thursday, February 2nd, in order for the prosecution to present two witnesses who testified in chambers about Murdaugh's financial crimes. The judge said that he needed to hear more testimony privately before ruling whether these witnesses would be allowed to testify before the jury. On February 6th, after several days of hearing arguments without the jury present, Judge Newman ruled that the testimony related to Murdaugh's alleged financial crimes was admissible. He said that the jurors were entitled to consider whether Murdaugh's financial situation was a motive for the killings. Newman also said that defense counsel had opened the door to testimony about the alleged financial crimes. They asked a witness to speculate about a positive motive for Murdaugh to commit the murders. A bomb threat on February 8th forced the court to recess for several hours. On February 13th, Judge Newman announced that two jurors had been dismissed and replaced with alternate jurors because they had been tested positive for COVID-19. And on a side note, who could forget the COVID-19 pandemic, how we were so overwhelmed by it, and how there was several shutdowns, government shutdowns all over the world for the most part. Anyways, on February 24th, a new charge was filed against Murdaugh for passing contraband in the courtroom. At the defense's request, the jury visited the murder scene. The first prosecution witnesses included first responders on the scene after Murdaugh's 9/11 call. The prosecution asked the judge to compel a representative of Snapchat to testify about a video posted by Paul Murdaugh minutes before his death. The prosecution brought SLED witnesses to testify about firearms and ballistics, and an interview conducted with Murdaugh in a car on June 21st, 2021, during which Murdaugh said of his son, "It's just so bad I did him so bad," which Waters emphasized for the jury. The defense team disputed whether the recording said "I" or "they." The prosecution brought an expert witness to testify about data collected by Maggie's phone. The prosecution brought two close friends of Paul Murdaugh to testify about their interactions with the Murdaugh family and their communications with Paul moments before his death. A witness said he heard Alex's voice in a video taken by Paul minutes before the time the prosecution believes the murders took place. Prosecutors called former colleagues and clients of Murdaugh to testify about the defendant's financial situation just before the murders occurred, and argued that the motive was stress caused by the impending discovery of Murdaugh's financial crimes. They also called a chief executive officer of a local bank to testify about the bank's discovery of death by Murdaugh. Prosecutors called expert witnesses, including a criminologist and pathologist. They called a SLED agent to testify about a timeline for the events of June 7, aggregating all of the data collected from various sources, including the cell phones of the victims and the defendant, car telemetry data, and cell phone tower pings. Prosecutors rested their case on February 17. Defense counsel called their first witness immediately after the prosecution rested their case. They called a Carleton County coroner who testified that he had only estimated the victim's body temperatures and that the reported time of death was an estimate. On February 21st, the defense called the defendant's surviving son, Buster, to the stand. The defense called several expert witnesses, including a crime scene engineer who recreated the crime scene, and argued that the presumed height of the shooter was not consistent with the defendant's height. Another expert witness testified that he believed the crime scene was not handled properly by first responders. On February 23rd, Murdaugh took the stand to testify. He denied shooting his wife and son. Murdaugh confirmed that he had Murdaugh, let me read it all over again. Confirmed that he could be heard in a video taken by his son at 8:44 p.m. at the kennels. Murdaugh admitted repeatedly to lying to law officers about whether he had been at the kennels at the night of the killings. Before he reported finding the bodies there later that night and attributed the lies to quote-unquote paranoid thinking from his addiction to opioids, he also admitted stealing from legal clients and his firm, and also admitted asking a relative to shoot him. The prosecutor's cross-examination began the same day. Murdaugh finished his testimony the next day, and Judge Newman dismissed the jury immediately after it concluded. The defense called a pathologist who testified that the state's pathologist had not correctly determined the entrance and exit wounds on Paul's body. The defense also called Tim Pombach, an expert in blood-stained spatter analysis. Pombach has also testified in such high-profile cases as the trial of Michael Peterson. Pombach testified that he believed that a shooter would have been covered in blood and gunshot residue. He also stated that he believed that the evidence was consistent with two shooters being present. The last witness the defense called was the defendant's brother, John Marvin Murdaugh. On February 27, the defense rested their case and moved for a directed verdict, which was subsequently denied by Judge Newman. After the defense rested their case, the prosecution indicated they would reply to the defense's case. On February 28th, the prosecution began their reply case by calling witnesses. Four of the witnesses they called had testified earlier. A police chief who had associated with Murdaugh was also called to the stand. The final witness was a crime scene expert called previously. South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson conducted the direct examination. The prosecution rested their reply case on February 28th. Closing arguments began on March 1st. On March 2nd, Judge Newman announced that he had been notified that a jury had discussed the evidence presented. The jury was dismissed for improper conduct and an alternate replaced her. Attorney Creighton Waters delivered the state's closing argument, and Attorney Jim Griffin delivered the defense's closing statement. Attorney John Meadows delivered the state's reply and final argument. The jury was charged and began deliberating on March 2nd. On March 2nd, 2023, after less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Murdaugh guilty of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Because of the intense public interest in the case, the verdict was transmitted live across the United States on major broadcast and cable news networks. After the verdict was read, Judge Newman denied a motion from the defense for a mistrial by saying, quote-unquote, the evidence of guilt is overwhelming. He told the jurors, quote-unquote, that the circumstantial evidence, direct evidence, all of the evidence pointed to one conclusion, and that's the conclusion that you all reached. Newman later added that the jury had come to a proper conclusion as they saw the law and facts. Murdaugh was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences and no better form, without the possibility of parole on March 3rd, 2023 at 10:08 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. After his sentencing, Murdaugh was taken to the Kirkland Correctional Institution in northwestern Columbia South Carolina for about 45 days, during which he was evaluated to determine maximum security prison he will be sent to. After the verdict, prosecutors held a press conference. The defense took questions from media the day after sentencing and said that they would appeal the verdict. In an interview a few days after the sentencing, Murdaugh's older brother Randy said he believed that his brother had not told the whole truth about what he knew about the killings. On March 9th, Murdaugh's attorneys filed a notice of appeal with the South Carolina Court of Appeals. And the sale conducted by Georgia-based Liberty Auction on March 23rd. Items sold from Murdaugh's property included antlers, turtle shell lamps, and furniture. On March 24th, at least, the U.S. Attorney's Office, District of South Carolina, announced that a federal grand jury returned an indictment of 22 counts for money laundering, wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to conspire wire fraud and bank fraud. On November 17, 2023, Murdaugh pled guilty to all 22 of the state's charges in the indictment. On November 29, 2023, he was sentenced to 27 years in prison in relation to the state's criminal indictments. In addition to the state's indictments, he was also indicted by the federal government. On April 1st, 2024, Murdaugh was sentenced in federal court to 40 years in federal prison for his financial fraud crimes that run concurrently with the previous sentences for murder and state financial crimes, and to pay reparations of $8.7 million to his victims, including the family of his former housekeeper Gloria Satterfield, after evidence of additional crimes was introduced. On September 3rd, 2023, Murdaugh's attorneys announced that they had evidence to file for a new murder trial. At a press conference held on September 5th, Murdaugh attorneys Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin allegedly jury tampering by Colleton County Clerk of Court Rebecca Hill, who subsequently released a book on the case Behind the Doors of Justice, the Murdaugh murders. The lawyers requested an evidentiary hearing to determine whether there should be a new trial. Harpootlian also sent a letter to United States Attorney for the District of South Carolina Adair Ford Burris, requesting a federal investigation of conduct in the case. Hill hired lawyers Justin Bombay and William Lewis to represent her in the case. On October 17, Chief Judge H. Bruce Williams of the South Carolina Court of Appeals signed an order granting Murdaugh's motion to suspend his conviction appeal and send the case back to circuit court to consider allegations of jury tampering by Hill. South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson asked SLED to investigate Hill as well. The Murdaugh legal team asked that Judge Clifton Newman be removed from his trial and all Murdaugh trials, stating their belief that he could not be impartial. Newman asked the South Carolina Circuit Court to remove him from the case, and they granted this request, issuing an order stating that former state Supreme Court Justice John H. Toll would handle the motion for a new trial and retain responsibility for all future matters regarding this case. On June 29, 2024, Toll denied Murdaugh's motion for a new trial. At a press conference held on March 25, 2024, Hill, standing with her attorney Justin Bamber, submitted her resignation from the post of Colleton County Clerk of Court to Governor Henry McMaster. After the lower court's decision in January, Murdaugh's lawyers appealed to the state Supreme Court. On August 13, 2024, the Supreme Court agreed to review the lower court's decision. No date was set. Now, with all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, what started out, and this is another case of what's seen to start out as your true, genuine love, and will be a case of for death to death do us part. ended up turning out fatal in the long run, which is another case of the title of the channel, Toxic Love. With that being said, make sure you also like, share, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, you guys have a good one. Welcome.